Hi, my name is Henju Vega. I'm the product manager for backup recovery and XDCR at Couchbase. Today, I want to tell you about the new backup recovery options in Couchbase Server 7 and introduce you to the backup service. You'll also learn about the new scopes and collection support and backup restore. Finally, I'll talk a bit about the differences between the backup service and CB Backup Manager and finish with a demo of backup service with direct backup to S3. Let's begin with a quick reminder about why backups are important. There's a lot to think about in disaster recovery nowadays, and one of them is that mistakes happen. For example, even if you use replication to replicate your data to multiple clusters, if a person were to accidentally delete data, that deletion will be replicated to all the other clusters. Same goes for data corruption. In such cases, high availability will not prevent data loss. Besides human error, you also need to be concerned about ransomware and meeting compliance and auditing requirements. For example, if you need to keep data beyond its operational use time, then backups are a good way to do that. So we've created the backup service to make backups and restores easy and simple to manage. The most prominent aspect of the feature is the UI, which allows you to easily set up scheduled automated backups for your cluster. You can also view tasks histories, examine data in the backups, and of course, restore data. And you can do all of these things using REST APIs, which are part of the backup service. The backup service utilizes CB Backup Manager. So you can do things like importing existing CB Backup Manager repositories into the backup service to examine and restore backups. Also, if needed, you can use CB Backup Manager to restore data from a backup service repository. The first thing to remember about backup service is that it's a service like any other MDS service in Couchbase. You have to add the service to your cluster. You can do this when you first create a cluster, or you can add the backup service to a new node and join the node to an existing cluster. Then in the UI, you go to the backup service tab and you add repository to take backups. When you add repository, you have the option of choosing file system or cloud for the backup storage location. In 7.0, cloud means S3 API compatible storage. In the following slides, we'll be looking at the active portion of the backup service, where I've created a repository using the backup service and ready to take backups. When you create the backup service repository, you also have to choose a schedule for your backups. There are a couple of schedules already created for you, or you can create your own. So, as seen in this slide, once you create your backup service repository, the backup jobs can run automatically via the scheduled tasks, or you can choose to take on-demand backups. And for on-demand backups, you can choose full or incremental. After taking a backup, you can click on the Inspect Backups to get detailed information about the backups. But before we move on to the next slide, let's see what else is available from this window, from this view. You can look at task histories and also get details about the repository, like services being backed up and the CB Backup Manager archive and repository names. Okay, now we're in the Inspect Backups view, and you're in the Data view, which shows you the list of backups and the detailed information about them. If you were to click on the tasks, you would see a list of commands that have been run, like backups and restores, and information about the task execution, the execution times, the success, the failure, the errors, etc. Also, all of the information you see here, you can also see using the backup service REST API commands, which are fully documented. Now, if you want to examine a document in the backups, you can put the document key and the collection where the document exists in the key and search path text boxes you see here and click on the Examine button. And what you'll see is the Examine Backups view. You can see how the document changed between the two backups. From the scroll list, you can choose any two backups from which to compare the document. Now on to restores. When you restore using the backup service, you can restore at the granularity of bucket, scopes, or collections. And you can map the data being restored into new buckets, scopes, or collections. These are the same options available in the CB Backup Manager command line tool, and I'll explain more about how they work in the next slides. It's time to find out about the CB Backup Manager scopes and collection support. You can now configure CB Backup Manager to backup at the bucket, scope, or the collection level. You can also restore at the granularity of a bucket, scope, collection, or a subset using options like filter keys or filter values. Now, in the first window on this slide, you'll see an example of using CB Backup Manager config and include data option to configure backing up just the beer sample default scope, which only contains the default collection. In the second command, we take the backup. Then in the second window, using the options Map Data and Filter Values, we restore just the documents with type beer from the beer sample default collection to a new collection called Beers in a new scope called Beer Service. The new scope and collection will be automatically created if they don't already exist. And the same restore options are available in the backup service. So now you might be asking yourself, is every CB Backup Manager option available in the backup service? Well, let's find out. The backup service only backs up the local cluster. The CB Backup Manager CLI can back up remote clusters. The backup service auto-configures the number of threads that's used. In the CB Backup Manager CLI, you can choose the number of threads that you want to run CB Backup Manager with using the threads option. In the backup service, there is no resume option for a failed backup, and that's because there are scheduled backups. The next backup is the next scheduled one. In the CB Backup Manager CLI, you can manually retry a failed backup with the resume option. Now, currently, the backup service only backs up data at the bucket's granularity. CB Backup Manager CLI can configure backups to back up at bucket, scope, or collection levels. The restore options for backup service and CB Backup Manager are the same, however. You can restore in the backup service at the granularity of buckets, scopes, or collections and use options like filter keys, filter values, map data. Now here are some common questions asked about the backup service. First one, can a cluster have more than one backup service? Yes, here's an example of a cluster with 2 backup service, 3 repositories, and an overlapping backup schedule. So you can see that 2 of the backups are running, 1 on each of the backup service nodes, and the third is waiting to run. Can multiple backup services work on one backup task? The answer is no. Each backup service works on a single task or a job at a time. So a single task or a job cannot be split among multiple backup services. Multiple backup services, however, can work on different backup tasks at the same time. Can you use CB Backup Manager CLI to restore from a backup service repository? Yes, and vice versa. You can also import an existing CB Backup Manager repository into the backup service to restore. In the example below, you can see an imported repository in the backup service. You can't take backups with an imported repository, but you can examine data and do restores. Now it's time for a demo. Hi, I'm on an EC2 instance where I've installed Couchbase Server 701. I'm going to set up a new cluster with the backup service, and I'm going to take a backup and do a restore. Before I do that, I want to show you that I have nothing in the bucket that I plan to do, in the S3 bucket that I plan to do my backups in. So here we go. There's nothing in there. And I want to check that I have the staging directory that I plan to use already created. So yes, it's created already. So let's go back and set up a new cluster. I'm going to call this cluster 1. Now I'm going to use this instance to do testing of 7 features. So I don't need quite as much resources as the defaults indicate. And here we go. We have the backup service, and I've added all the other services because, like I said, I plan to use this instance to check out some of the new features. Okay. So I don't have any new buckets, so I'm going to go to sample buckets, and I'm going to install the beer sample and the game sim sample buckets. And while that's going on, here's the backup service tab. So let's go into the backup service tab and add repository. Now, there's some plans in here already created for you, hourly backups and daily backups, but I want to create a new plan. And I'm going to call it my S3 plan. And all of the services are already checked. And I'm going to add a task. And normally I might do a weekly calendar and take a full backup on Sunday, and then maybe normal backup on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But because this is a test, I'm just going to take a backup every minute, every few minutes. So I'm going to call this test backups. And the type is backup and frequency is 5 minutes. And I'm going to now add this. This repository is going to be called cluster 1 all buckets because I'm going to take backups of all the buckets that are on this cluster. So all buckets are already checked. And I'm going to back up to cloud. And the staging directory was admin. I had already created that directory and checked that it existed. And the provider is AWS. And the cloud bucket, the bucket name was, just going to call it my demo. And the authentication type. Now I'm on an EC2 instance and it has an instance profile, an IAM profile. So I'm just going to say instance metadata service to go ahead and use the instance metadata that's on this EC2 instance. Now, I don't need to set these advanced cloud options. You might need to if you have an S3 API compatible bucket that requires you to use force path style or to specify an endpoint. Just going to add. So now I have my repository, backup repository with my S3 plan. Now it's going to run a backup every 5 minutes. The next backup is going to run about 5 minutes from now. And the archive location is in my S3 bucket right here. And I don't really want to wait 5 minutes, so I'm just going to go ahead and do an on-demand backup. I'm just going to run backup and perform a full backup. Right, so there's a backup going on. So while that's going on, let's see what else we can learn about our buckets that we've created from the sample buckets. Now, the quickest way to find out about this might be to go into the query and take a look. And you can see that there's a default scope and a default collection, and there are about 7,303 documents in there. And there's some documents with type equals beer, and there's some documents with type equals brewery here. So what we want to do is, after we take a backup, we want to take the documents with type equals beer, which are about 82% of this collection, and restore the data into a new collection. So let's see. It's still running the backup. So we're going to go ahead. While it's doing that, we want to check out some of the other things that the backup service offers. There we go. So the backup service comes with REST APIs. One of them is to check out the plans. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So it should have the plan that I had created. Here it is, my S3 plan. It's very simple with the information. Well, we can check the task history to see what's going on there. See if our backup's finished. It says complete true right here. Errored false. So this task name is status done. So our backup's done. So we can go ahead and go back and check in our backup. There we go. Now it tells you when the next backup is. All right, so let's inspect the backups. And it has the bucket game sim sample and the beer sample buckets. Okay. So it's got about 7,303 documents in it. Okay, so now we want to do a restore of this backup. Run restore. We want to restore only the type beer, and we only want to restore the beer sample. We don't want to restore anything from the game sim sample, and we want to take the beer sample default And let's create a new bucket. Call it beer, new beer. Beer service, beers. And what we want to do is we want to auto create buckets because we don't have a bucket named new beer. And let's see what happens. And it says it's running the restore. So let's go to the buckets. And there we go, new beer bucket, it's created it. So it should be restoring right now. Now, while it's doing that, let's go ahead and check and see what's actually in our bucket now. Yeah, you can see that there's a bunch of files in there for backups. So it did do a backup to our S3 bucket. And it's restored to our new beer bucket, a part of our backup. So that was pretty simple. Now, I don't want to do any more with this, so I'm going to pause this because I don't want it to take more backups because I'm about to. This is the end of the demo. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed finding out all about the new backup service in Couchbase 7. Thank you.